Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Ayash Kuncic, and I'm working in the Resident Coordinator's Office in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and I will be your Master of Ceremony for today's event. Firstly, let me apologize for the brief delay on account of technical issues. I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers, participants, and colleagues to this live stream event. We have prepared this live stream on the occasion of United Nations Day, which today, on the 24th of October 2020, also coincides with the 75th anniversary of the organization. While the world is going through an unprecedented crisis because of COVID-19 pandemic, this virtual conference gives us the opportunity to discuss how local and international communities can work together to recover from the crisis and build back better. Participants will be encouraged to share best practices and knowledge on strategies to reduce the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 and accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I would like to invite Her Excellency Ms. Nathalie Fustier, UN Resident Coordinator in Saudi Arabia, to deliver the opening and welcoming remarks. Please.
Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished speakers and panelists, esteemed guests and colleagues, good afternoon, Salam Alaikum. The United Nations officially came into existence on the 24th of October 1945, when the Charter of the United Nations that was signed a few months before in San Francisco had been ratified by the majority of its signatories. There were 50 at the time, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was one of its founding members, which makes our relationship so special. That is why I am really happy to celebrate here in Riyadh the anniversary of our organization. The UN at 75. This is the bel âge, as we say in French. At 75, people get old. They have accumulated a massive amount of experience throughout their lifetime, but they are still vibrant and more indispensable than ever for their family members and relatives. The same goes for our common organization. Born out of the horrors of the Second World War, the United Nations, as a common endeavor for humanity, was established to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, promote and protect human rights, and advance progress and development across the world. Throughout its history, the UN has saved millions of lives through humanitarian action, promoted freedom, shaped a rules-based international system, set up norms for international development, and actively worked to provide children with the education they deserve. Our common organization is indispensable in times of great disruption. For this anniversary, the UN Secretary General has launched a global conversation on the future we want. And our dialogue today is a contribution to this conversation. What future do we want while the world is once again facing a human tragedy, a threat that jeopardizes decades of progress and development? That is the question. The COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented global health crisis with severe economic and social impacts that has taken a heavy toll on our lives and continues to wreak havoc around the world. Over 1 million people have died and 35 million have been reported infected. The real numbers are likely higher and will continue to increase. The economic and social consequences are dire. Negative growth is expected in 172 countries in 2020. The global growth contraction is projecting to hit 4.4% in 2020. Extreme poverty is set to increase by 88 to 115 million people. Equivalent job losses are expected to hover around 435 million people. In Saudi Arabia, the impact of COVID-19 also caused hardship and spearheaded the government to take proactive measures to cope with the challenges. These numbers highlight the severity of this protracted crisis that has spared no country from its devastating impacts and will require a common determination to recover from. We know that health and socio-economic impacts are intertwined. We know that the pandemic is not over until it's really over, until we have a vaccine, and only that vaccine is available globally. There will be no economic recovery, no rebound without addressing and controlling the virus for everyone, everywhere. Cooperation and partnerships are more crucial than ever. That is why, along with the UN Secretary General, we commend Saudi Arabia's leadership as the chair of the G20 in 2020. At the outset of the pandemic, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia convened an extraordinary summit where G20 leaders expressed their grave concern and committed to do whatever it takes to overcome the pandemic. While facilitating the consensus building among G20 countries on several critical issues, such as the coordination of fiscal stimuli, mobilization of resources to address the immediate financing needs in global health, debt relief for the poorest countries to help them overcome the socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis, etc., the G20 should spare no efforts to keep leading the global health emergency response and the global economic recovery. The upcoming Riyadh Summit of the G20 leaders will be held at the critical juncture and provides a unique opportunity to keep advancing towards an inclusive and sustainable future for all. Stakes are high, and global solidarity is not only a moral imperative, but a practical necessity in an interconnected world. And that is why we are holding this UNDAY event under the theme Recovering from the COVID-19 crisis and advancing towards sustainable development in Saudi Arabia, building on the UN-G20 Partnership. We wish to reflect on how to recover from the COVID-19 crisis and build the future we want from three specific angles. How to overcome the COVID-19 crisis and build back better with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a blueprint for an inclusive and sustainable recovery for all. How the international community can better work together to tackle these challenges. From this perspective, the G20 Saudi presidency and the upcoming Riyadh Summit represent a unique opportunity to come up with common solutions, develop partnerships, implement actionable policies for the group of the most powerful country and the United Nations at large. Finally, how to better leverage international cooperation and multi-stakeholder partnerships at the national level as a cross-fertilization process. In the Kingdom, let us build on the G20 presidency efforts and UN engagement to further advance the Vision 2030 and achieve the SDGs. I warmly welcome the participation of distinguished speakers and panelists from Saudi Arabia and around the world, from academia, the public sector, and civil society organizations, and sincerely thank you for your contributions to our conversation today. We strive for an open dialogue on how to recover from the crisis and build back better with the aim of exchanging knowledge and experience to keep advancing sustainable development in the Kingdom, in the region, and in the world. A special thank you to the G20 presidency, and Sherpa His Excellency Fahad Al-Mubarak, who is going to deliver a keynote speech on the G20's role and actions under the Saudi presidency that can bring momentum and gain traction in our collective response to the crisis. Our dialogue will turn around two thematic sessions. The first one, on financing sustainable development in the context of COVID-19, will aim to elaborate on today's challenges of financing sustainable development globally and locally, and possible ways forward in getting back on track to realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as we are definitely off track. The second session, on promoting health and human capital, will explore how local and international communities can leverage the potential of human capital to achieve sustainable development and recover better, including in sharing best practices and knowledge sharing to reduce the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. Without further delay, let us have this dialogue, and I wish us a very fruitful conversation to build the future we want. Thank you.
I would like to thank Her Excellency Ms. Nathalie Fustier for delivering the opening remarks. Proceeding with the keynote address for this live stream event, I would like to inform our audience that the keynote speaker for the day is His Excellency Dr. Fahad Al-Mubarak, Saudi Sherpa to the G20. Dr. Fahad Al-Mubarak is a state minister and a member of Saudi Council of Ministers since 2019. Dr. Al-Mubarak is also the Saudi G20 Sherpa since September 2018 and has held many positions in both private and public sector in the past 38 years of his very productive career. His Excellency Dr. Fahad Al-Mubarak will deliver his keynote speech through a pre-recorded video for this occasion, which will now be played.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be invited to this important occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations today in Saudi Arabia with the title Recovering from COVID-19 Crisis and Advancing Toward Sustainable Development in Saudi Arabia, building on the UN-G20 Partnership. I'm happy and privileged to participate in today's event. Saudi Arabia was one of the 51 countries that participated in this event through a delegation headed by then late King Faisal, the foreign minister at that time, who signed the charter as a founding member at the ceremony held in San Francisco. Since then, the United Nations has grown to include a number of different agencies operating in and in partnership with Saudi Arabia and under the United Nations banner. The Kingdom has continued to demonstrate its commitment to the United Nations and the principles of the UN Charter. We value our close partnership with the United Nations and all its organizations. We also take pride in our cooperation and contribution to the multiple entities within the United Nations. Back in 2019, when we started preparing for our presidency, we called upon the UN, and we had a 2-day workshop with the United Nations Development UNDP program, and where we explored all the challenges facing the world from the point of view of the United Nations and developed jointly many potential policy solutions in order to address those challenges. Those ideas being part of our program that we have announced at the beginning of the year, where we had an overarching theme of realizing opportunities of the 21st century for all countries, all people. This overarching theme is translated into 3 main aims. The first one being empowering people which is at the heart of the G20 action through fostering resilience and health care provision, renewing the focus on education and protecting labor market while also prioritizing women and youth employment. The second aim is to safeguard the planet, which was one of our priorities as we make growth stronger and sustainable while protecting our natural resources. Our third aim is shaping new frontiers by harnessing the benefits of digital technologies, boosting the opportunities for all, and ensuring a better connected world. As you all know, the G20 is the premier economic forum made up of the largest 20 economies in the world. But when we put our policy, we do it for the entire world, all countries, all people. And G20 has been created in the past to address global crises. At the ministers of finance levels and central bank governors back in 1999 to address the Asian crisis, and then again was elevated in 2008 and 2009 to the leaders level to address the global financial crisis. In both cases, we came together collectively and been able to put policies in action in order to address and resolve many of those crises and bring back growth and jobs. This time, however, with this pandemic, COVID-19, the stakes are far higher than financial institutions. It is human lives and livelihoods at risk. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is an avid advocate of international cooperation and solidarity. His Majesty, the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, took an affirmative action and called for a virtual extraordinary leaders summit back in March of this year. The G20 leaders came together, showcasing strength, solidarity, and cooperation to face the health, social, and economic challenges. The summit had many outcomes, and I'd like to share with you some of those outcomes. The leaders have agreed that the G20 countries have collectively injected an unprecedented stimulus of over $11 trillion into the global economy. The G20 pledged over $21 billion to support the development of vaccines and distribution. Saudi Arabia contribution was $500 million into that pledge. The G20 launched a debt relief initiative that would allow 73 eligible countries to reallocate $20 billion toward their imminent health and financial needs. And recently, the finance ministers and central bank governors extended this provision for another 6 months. We also committed to ensuring the flow of vital medical supplies and critical agricultural products across borders. It has been a very challenging year, yet we have been successful in navigating through and executing our original G20 2020 program for this year that was announced back in December 2019. Over the past 11 months, we held over 24 ministerial meetings, 11 of which were extraordinary and planned to address the COVID-19 challenges in health, trade, digital, tourism, and other sectors. 5 Sherpa meetings, including the extraordinary meeting, and we still have 2 more to do. 74 working groups and 42 side events that supports the themes and ideas and programs that Saudi Arabia put forth for this year. We have issued over 17 statements and communiques. Also, we have the civil society, the engagement group, who have been extremely active with more than 50 individual statements were issued and 15 joint reports, and countless number of meetings, and their participation in working groups and ministerial and side events, meetings. We were very grateful for their contribution and their recommendations. This year, we've been able to achieve a lot of initiatives and great policies that will help us develop a brighter future for our people. We have been developing many outcomes that I will share with you some of them. The circular carbon economy platform that offer a comprehensive solution to the carbon emission situation, where we have both adaptation and mitigations, and with the objective of reducing carbon, reusing it, recycling it, and removing it altogether. G20 initiative to reduce land degradation and habitat loss. Global Coral Reef Research and Development Accelerator Platform. Riyadh Initiative on the future of WTO in order to reform WTO under its own umbrella. We were able to approve that principle among the ministers of trade. G20 Youth Roadmap, very important sector in our society and community that we need to support. The G20 Emergency Support to COVID-19 Response and Recovery Plan in developing countries. No one's safe unless everyone's safe. So we paid special attention to developing and less developed countries in this aspect. The G20 Action Plan sets out the key principle guiding our response and commitments. The G20 Roadmap to enhance cross-border payments, and many more other initiatives that I invite you to the G20 website to review and the detail of those initiatives. Now, we are turning our attention to the Leaders Summit in November, with only a few weeks to go. We are planning to have a unified message that reflects restoring health, growth, and jobs, building on an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future, enhancing an inclusive recovery that tackles inequalities, and putting sustainability in the heart of recovery. With the continued support of our G20 nations and the broader international community, we are confident that the Riyadh Summit will be successful to deliver positive outcomes that will restore hope to citizens around the world. Once again, I congratulate the UN for a very important occasion of the 75th anniversary, and I thank you very much for allowing me to share our thoughts and ideas, and we look forward to continuous support and working with the UNDP going forward toward the summit. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Fahad Al-Mubarak for delivering his keynote speech. The next item on the agenda is to move forward with the first thematic session. Thematic session 1 is on financing sustainable development in the COVID-19 context and beyond. This session aims to elaborate on today's challenges of financing sustainable development globally and locally in the COVID-19 context and discuss possible ways forward. I would like to inform the audience that we will be taking comments and questions from the participants at the end of this thematic panel in a Q&A session. The comments and questions will be shortly enabled to be posted during the thematic panel using the live chat section right of the video stream. The first thematic session will be moderated by Mr. Thierry Sauret, Senior Policy Advisor, Multilateral Development, UNDP. I would like to invite Mr. Thierry Sauret to initiate discussions.
Thank you so much, Alhaj. Your Highness, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends, good afternoon. Welcome to the first session. My name is Thierry Sauret, and I'm happy to be the moderator of our conversation today on financing sustainable development. We are at a critical juncture. Before the outbreak of COVID-19, a year ago, The UN Secretary General stated already that we are collectively off track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And the IMF estimated at $520 billion the financing gap to achieve the SDGs in developing countries alone. The situation has not improved with COVID-19 crisis, quite the contrary. Financing remains a major hindrance, further derailed by a deep global economic contraction and high debt, which threaten to erase years of development progress and leave behind the most vulnerable. Finance must be high on the agenda. Both the United Nations and the G20 took important initiatives, and our conversation today is an opportunity to look into these initiatives and see how they can be further aligned and reinforce each other to lay the grounds for an inclusive and sustainable recovery. In our conversation, we will also elaborate on today's challenges at the national level and identify possible ways forward in the context of Saudi Arabia and the region. To lead this conversation and to help me in this conversation, we will have the privilege to benefit from the insights of 4 distinguished speakers. Navid Hanif is the Director of the Financing for Sustainable Development Office at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. He leads the work of the Interagency Task Force on Financing for Development and is the UN Deputy Representative in the finance track of the G20. Good morning, Navid. Thanks for joining us from New York.
Good morning, Thierry. Thank you for the opportunity.
Princess Haifa is Al-Mogrin is the permanent delegate of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at UNESCO, and she's the chair of the G20 Development Working Group during the Saudi presidency. Good afternoon, Princess Haifa. Good to see you from Paris, where I hope the situation is not too difficult under the curfew.
Hello, everyone. Everything is under control, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Marcos Neto is the director of the Finance Sector Hub that leads the Sustainable Finance Agenda at UNDP. He co-chairs the executive board of the Business Call to Action and has an extensive career on the private sector role in development. Good morning, Marcos. Good to see you, my friend from New York. And thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Thierry. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Assalamu alaikum.
And Dr. Hafnan Koshak is the founder and CEO of Atorona for social impact strategies that helps social sector organizations in Saudi Arabia. And she is currently leading a joint research project on OCAF for SDGs and Vision 2030. Good afternoon, Dr. Hafnan, and thanks for being with us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, and happy to be with all of you today.
Thank you. So without further delay, let's get started. Let me start with you, Navid. From your perspective, what are the key challenges for the financing sustainable development agenda in the context of this crisis? And how can the main policy recommendations that came up from the UN initiative to support developing countries, how can this policy recommendation can address these challenges? The floor is yours, Navid.
Thank you, Thierry. Thank you for a great opening. Let me congratulate UN Saudi Arabia under the leadership of Ms. Natalie Fustier for organizing this special event. Yes, 75th anniversary is time to reflect back, but also look forward what the organization has achieved and its potential to address the challenges we are facing. So good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, and good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. When I received the invitation for today's event, I was intrigued by 2 themes that we are addressing today. On one hand, the efforts to finance the recovery from COVID-19, and on the other, the UNDAY on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. What do these 2 themes have in common? To give you the answer up front, these are inextricably linked. Indeed, as I will present today, there can be no sustained recovery from COVID-19 without coordinated multilateral action in a strong United Nations. And Ms. Natalie Fuster, in her thoughtful and thought-provoking remarks, made the same point. The need for a strong multilateral system to address global challenges is by no means a new idea, but one that was born 75 years ago. It was the idea of a United Nations committed to advance peace and prosperity through global coordinated action. As we face the most daunting immediate challenge to global prosperity, the need for a strong multilateral system is more apparent than ever. In fact, it is the only way out of the simultaneous crises triggered by the global pandemic. The health, economic, social, and humanitarian effects of COVID-19 have been devastating across the globe. Without a shadow of doubt, the crisis has hit commodity exporting and tourism-dependent countries particularly hard. And Thierry mentioned a few figures, but last week the IMF forecasted 4.1% decline in real GDP in this region, in West Asia in 2020, which is 1.3 percentage points larger than projected in April 2020, which means the impacts are even more severe than we thought 5-6 months ago. And ladies and gentlemen, no source of financing that we are seeking to mobilize for the Sustainable Development Goals has been spared. The devastating effects of the pandemic, be it tax revenues, trade, FDI, remittances, this is just to name a few. We are facing nothing short of a crisis for financing for development. But we are not sitting idle, we are acting. Last month, the UN Secretary General, together with the Prime Ministers of Canada and Jamaica, convened a high-level meeting with heads of states from across the globe to discuss solutions to tackle financing challenges associated with COVID-19. The meeting discussed a comprehensive menu of policy options. And let me mention what were the areas: external finance, recovering better for sustainability, global liquidity, debt vulnerability, private sector creditors, and of course, illicit financial flows. And let me highlight a number of specific recommendations, as Thierry asked me to mention, that were amplified by heads of state on 29th of September. First, and they looked at policy options from two angles: the immediate crisis needs and those which are required to build better moving forward. And let me start with the policy options for immediate financing needs. First, urgent policy actions to tackle the debt crisis, which is spiraling out of control. To avert the crisis, we must expand the standstill, provide debt relief for countries in need, and use innovative instruments such as debt for SDG or debt for climate swaps. We should address gaps in the global architecture for sovereign debt. Second, global liquidity shortages must be tackled head-on. New funds and liquidity facilities are needed that increase access to financing for developing countries. And we must renew the discussion on allocating new and existing special drawing rights. Third, we must scale up consensual financing and ensure that commitments to development assistance are met. To better mobilize diaspora investments, cost of remittances must be reduced to support hundreds of millions of families depending on this source of financing. It is a simple measure, but significant impact. Fourth, the policy options menu calls for big picture thinking on a global coordination and cooperation mechanism that will promote joint trade and investment for recovery and reconstruction. Both trade and investment have plummeted in response to the crisis and must be revived to kickstart economic growth. Now let me highlight a few options on the big picture put forward to achieve a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future beyond COVID-19. And I must emphasize, recovering is not our objective. We have to reimagine, rethink, redesign our systems. So what are the big picture policy options? First, addressing climate change. To build forward in a resilient and stronger way, we must advance policies that create sustainable, inclusive, dynamic, and resilient economies. This will neither happen overnight and nor on its own accord. To finance this transition, we need innovative instruments, including SDG bonds, increased private investment into sustainable development. Private companies can be key enablers of a shift towards a sustainable post-COVID economy if they invest into sectors and countries where such financing is most impactful. Second, we need to prioritize investments in digitalization and new technologies with a focus on open, inclusive, affordable, and secure access to digital technology. This includes measures for fair and equitable taxation of the digital economy and employment generation in digital sectors. Third, we certainly need to advance financial innovation and make it accessible in order to strengthen financial inclusion and enable small and medium enterprises to be a catalyst for the rejuvenation of the economy. And fourth, we must tackle illicit financial flows, which divert resources from both immediate financing needs and recovery efforts. Create measures that have been put forward, including strengthened transparency and cooperation on asset recovery and return. And I fully understand that the implementation of the policy options that I just outlined is not easy by any means. They can only be achieved through global coordinated action and a strong partnership between the United Nations and, of course, G20 led by Saudi Arabia in a very effective manner. Indeed, many of the priorities I have just outlined have been closely aligned with the priorities of the G20 under the leadership of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And Dr. Fahad mentioned those. And we commend Saudi Arabia for its leadership in responding to COVID-19, in mobilizing the G20. Since the onset of the crisis, the G20 has been a vanguard for the global coordinated response to COVID-19. The actions taken by the G20 over the past months, including the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative, have been instrumental in providing countries support to respond and recover from the crisis. We must build on these achievements. The policy options provided us with a full arsenal of policy instruments that can be taken up by the G20 in its actions to further advance global recovery efforts. And we have presented those policy options to the presidency to use as they deem appropriate. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN has a vital role in delivering normative and policy solutions to tackle these challenges and in supporting countries in achieving their development aspirations. Let me end with a quote from former Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld. He said that the pursuit of peace and progress cannot end in a few years, either in victory or defeat. The pursuit of progress and peace, with its trials and its errors, its successes and its setbacks, can never be relaxed and never abandoned. I believe this is ever so relevant today. The very best ideas are worth pursuing no matter the challenges we face. The ideas of a United Nations and of a sustainable future for our planet and humanity are certainly such ideas that we should pursue with unwavering resolve and resilience. Thank you once again for your attention and the opportunity to join this distinguished panel. Thank you, Thierry and Natalie Fustier.
Thank you very much, Navid, for bringing things into perspective, history, and to outline the big picture of this COVID-19 crisis that is, as you said, way more devastating than we expected earlier, and that is the worst crisis that the world is facing since World War II. What I noticed is that you really mentioned that we need to have a multilateral system that is working effectively, efficiently in the face of these global challenges. And the set of policy options that came up from the UN initiative is really important, as we can tap into in order to advance financing for sustainable development agenda. But we need to have the political will. And here, the cooperation between the UN and the G20 might be an interesting lever we can act on. I would like to turn now to Princess Haifa. Financing for sustainable development was already high on the agenda at the beginning of the G20 Saudi presidency and a key priority of the development working group that you chair. It has even become front and center throughout this crisis in the finance track as well. So from your perspective, what should be the key achievement on the G20 of the G20 in this area? How the presidency adjusted its agenda to respond to the crisis, and what are your expectations for the summit that will be held in only 4 weeks now?
Hello, Thierry. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hello, Thierry, and hello, everyone. I want to express again how happy I am to be part of this UN celebration. I feel that I'm among friends and family here today. I would like to thank Ms. Natalie Fustier for her invitation and all of the UN team for having this day celebrated despite what is happening globally. I'm very happy to be among distinguished guests and panelists today. As always, I mean, very familiar faces and faces that I'm proud of and I look up to. I'm very happy to be among you today, and I'm very happy to hear also your reflections and ideas about how you see things are going forward, especially on this day today, where the multilateral work and its relevance is more than ever. I'm going to talk today about financing for sustainable development from the viewpoint of the Development Working Group. Of course, it's a very important topic, especially in the time of crisis that we are going through today. My discussion today is going to focus on two dimensions. The first dimension is what challenges are facing financing for sustainable development, and what is the purpose of and the dimensions of the financing for sustainable development framework that we are working on under the G20 Development Working Group this year. I'm not going to add more to what, of course, Natalie, Naveed, I think, I mean, they have covered a lot. Dr. Fahad, His Excellency, covered also a very great dimension. But as you know, I mean, the 2030 agenda was adopted in 2015. And with the Sustainable Development Goals and its target and the interconnectivity and interrelationship and its own spillovers that can happen. Governments here are to decide on how these aspirational and global targets can be incorporated into national planning processes, policies, strategies. In late 2019, the UN Secretary General highlighted that we are seriously off track. And of course, to achieve SDGs by 2030, there is a lack of financing as a contributing factor. As the Development Working Group is a coordinating body, a policy resource for sustainable development in the G20 and between G20 working groups and streams, the Development Working Group introduced an integrated and strategic framework for financing for sustainable development. Before we started addressing the issue by itself, we had to look back and think about the challenges that are facing financing for sustainable development. And the discussion has brought a number of interesting challenges that were the basis of what we have built later within the group and our colleagues in the Development Working Group. One of the challenges that we have noticed was that the focus has been mostly on monetary gaps. And here I'm not addressing or criticizing the amazing international work that took place, but actually I'm adding to what Naveed has said, what Nathalie said, His Excellency Dr. Fahad said, that addressing financing for sustainable development is multidimensional. And that the fact that financing gaps measured in monetary terms assumes a perfectly elastic supply of physical and human resources for sustainable development. But financial resources alone cannot bridge the resources gap. Second challenge that we have noticed is the macro and microeconomic implications. There are macroeconomic impacts of possible large inflows to a country, including effects on exchange rates, effects on inflation, aggregate and sectoral outputs, and also on fiscal and external balances. For example, improving healthcare requires doctors, nurses, and training these professionals take time and needs schools and universities. The third challenge that we have addressed is the convergence rate. What we call as convergence rate is that wide per capita income and wealth gaps between many developing and developed countries. This affects the priorities of achieving SDGs. People act differently and prioritize development differently in lower income countries than in higher income countries due to difference in the context itself. There is a law I would like to address here, is the law of convergence, or the iron law of convergence. It shows that developing countries close per capita income gaps with advanced countries at a rate of 2% per year under good policies. So for example, a country with a 2,000 per capita growing at a 2% rate faster than advanced country with a 20,000 per capita income, it will close only half the gap in 35 years. So the gap will be from 10 times higher to 5 times higher. And this implicates the speed of changing the priorities, and it affects the way we address the priorities of sustainable development within one country or another, or the way we address it in general. The fourth challenge that we have looked at is that even before COVID-19, there is a decline in long-term productivity growth in advanced countries. There is also demographic challenges in aging societies and other factors that affect financing for sustainable development. All these challenges has been put into considerations and guided the discussions that we had among the G20 Development Working Group members to address and come out with the DWG Financing for Sustainable Development Framework. So this year we have worked on this framework to develop it, and the aim was to is to mobilize finances, improve the efficiency and impact of expenditure. The purpose of the Financing Sustainable Development Framework is to serve as a guideline to design, implement, review policies, and support activities in accordance with national contexts, under the consideration that enable to facilitate robust, sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. An integrated financing framework on mobilizing finance from all viable resources is a priority. The framework itself, if you can please move to the next slide, I'm sorry. The framework covers 3 pillars. The first one is domestic resource mobilization and alignment. Second is improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the delivery. And third, and as it is widely and strongly needed now, how can we strengthen the G20 cooperation and the multilateral cooperation in general? The first pillar, if I can zoom in, which is the domestic resource mobilization and alignment. What we have discussed under this pillar is that resource mobilization and alignment should be in line with the country's development agenda towards achieving sustainable development. It should be aligned and focused on sectors with the highest impact and spillover effects to maximize their impact as per each country's context. Mobilization of domestic resource mobilization and alignment also should focus on productivity, efficiency, steady increase in per capita income, and savings and investment. The second pillar that we have looked upon, or that we are developing with our, or almost done with our colleagues in the Development Working Group, is improving efficiency and effectiveness of the delivery. So now if we can mobilize and align, how can we implement, how can we go forward in our sustainable development implementation? So when we have, how can we make this framework effective? Whether it was international framework or national financing framework, it must help increase the efficiency in the delivery. Why is that? Because prospects for increased efficiency and effectiveness could attract both local and additional international resources. In this regard, developing local capacity and managerial capital to improve the management of private and public capital are important. The third pillar, strengthening G20 cooperation. And I must say here, before I start with this pillar, that multilateralism is currently facing a lot of challenges as opposed to bilateral relations. I think it should not be either or, but multilateralism now and the role of the United Nations and the G20 and other multilateral platforms is very important in whether addressing the crises that are happening or providing the right framework, the right platforms, the right support for resilience and sustainable development to be able to overcome future crises. Now, this pillar is about strengthening the G20 cooperation. And how can the G20 assist in the capacity building? How can they share experiences, knowledge? How can they promote mutually agreed terms of transfer of technology, for example? Also, the G20 members could engage with relevant regional international organizations, for example, regional and international multilateral development banks, think tanks, academia, and how can they share the best practices among them with regard to financing for sustainable development. If we can move to the third slide, please. And touching on this last comment here, in addition to the framework, we had further discussions where we invited think tanks, practitioners, and academics to enrich the discussions in this side event, or the side event that we have held a side event in the development working group meetings on financing for sustainable development. In this event, the discussion focused on the importance of national savings schemes for sustainable development, the role of managerial capital. Also, we listened to representatives from developing countries. They discussed the impact and challenges the COVID-19 has on development in their countries. The event has focused on two key pillars. The first pillar, as I said before, is the introduction of national savings schemes, or even expansion of existing schemes to mobilize private resources. And the second is how can we enable the flow, absorption, and development of local managerial capital to improve productivity and economic efficiency in the public and private sectors. These two pillars could improve the risk-return profiles of private and public domestic and foreign investment through improving economic incentives, efficiency, and resilience. At the end, what I would like to say about this framework, in general, if I can sum this in two sentences, this framework addresses the challenges facing financing for sustainable development. It proposes solutions to have better utilization of fiscal resources to assist in times of crisis. It also addresses the need for local capacity building and sharing best practices to support countries, especially developing countries. And this calls for more collaboration, more coordination at the regional or the international level to make sure that not only we fight the current crisis, that we are ready to fight even future crises with more resilience, more collaboration, and more sense of human solidarity. I would like to thank you all. I hope I did not take more than my time, and thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you so much, Haifa, for this very comprehensive presentation of the financing for sustainable framework to be adopted, I guess, by the leaders at the Riyadh Summit in a month. It's very interesting to see how this framework has been built on the three pillars: mobilization of all sources of finance, efficiency of delivery, and cooperation, to really increase the flow of finance towards sustainable development in low-income and developing countries. I thank you so much. Now I would like to turn to Marcos. Marcos, the reform of the financial system seems to be key in order to channel and align private finance towards sustainable development investment, while the COVID-19 crisis laid bare pre-existing and structural fragilities. UNDP is extremely active on this front. So what would be the building blocks of such a reform, and what role could play the integrated national financing frameworks that come from the Addis Ababa Action Agenda in this endeavor to build back better? Marcos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jahi. Good evening, good afternoon to everyone. Your Excellency Princess Haifa, Naveed, it's a pleasure to join you all here. I'm going to build up on what has already been talked about it. And among all of the works of UNDP in the area of finance for development, I'm going to focus on three pieces of our work in trying to advance this agenda. One, our work with OECD at the request of the G7 in putting forward a global sustainable finance framework. After, I will talk a little bit about our set of standards that we are working to help private capital to align and to comply with the SDGs, and last, the integrated national financial framework in that sense. So we were asked by the G7 under the French presidency in 2019 to work together with colleagues at OECD into looking around what could be a guiding framework to align capital to the SDGs. I think it's important to notice that, you know, even with COVID, even with the situation that was described by Naveed and the IMF is describing, a lot of the problems pre-COVID and I think post-COVID on finance and sustainable development is not necessarily a lack of money. There's plenty of money in the world, and when it's necessary, as we've seen in the current crisis, governments are able to mobilize very large sums of money going forward. The question is, how does this money align with Agenda 2030? How does it come in a way that, you know, it's able to deliver financial returns, which is essential, as well as social and environmental returns? And that is what we are trying to do with our colleagues at OECD. As you can see here, alignment means the accelerating the process, the progress across the SDGs, while doing no harm to any single objective. That's the sustainability, but also the mobilizing the resources to leave no one behind. Feeling the investments that are needed everywhere in the world for the SDGs. So that's a work that we are about to deliver to the G7, you know, at the Paris Peace Forum in about a couple of weeks now. And we are also in conversations both with the G20 and the next presidents of G7 on how this work can carry on into years to come in that sense. While doing this work, what we realize, and I think COVID has made it so much more kind of clear and crystallized in everybody else's, the challenges that we have in our society, the inequalities that we have, the unpreparedness that we were, right, as a society to deal with a crisis that was not necessarily unpredicted. I think we have lived through regional challenges with epidemic before. We have always put plans. So if we were unprepared as we did with that, we know that other crises are going to be around the corner, either you know, medical or health-based crisis or climate-induced crisis. I think it's an important point for us is to how do we, you know, take this moment now and build forward back better. You know, I think as Naveed quoted a former UN Secretary General, I'm going to quote the former British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, when he said that we should never let a crisis go to waste. I think what COVID has done is shown us the vulnerability, shown us the weakness we have it, but we have to make sure that we come out of this better. And to some degree, this framework we started to put it together before COVID did, we actually learned from and took into consideration what was going on to strengthening going forward. We also believe that alignment of capital to the SDGs is able to, in the short term, stop the bleeding that we are seeing here, and in the long term, the build back better. Now, alignment can support the reduction of inequalities, can build sustainability, can achieve the volume necessary of financial resources. Now, as I said, there is no shortage of money, public and private, around the world. And the question is, how does it go to the right places? And how does it focus on the right impact in going forward? Now, what is this framework? So we've looked around. We're not trying to necessarily invent something brand new. So we did a large global stock take it, working together with you know, Naveed and others in terms of figuring out what is already going on and what are the obstacles of this alignment of capital. One of the things we realize is there has been a massive proliferation of standards in the last 10 to 15 years around the world. You know, environmental, social, and governance standards, you know, principles for responsible investments, and so on and so forth. But it has got to a degree that there are so many standards that investors are actually confused to some degree. So the first pillar of this framework is that how do we kind of rationalize all the standards that exist around the world, make them compatible, not necessarily say that ones are better than the others, but to some degree organize in a way that it becomes easier and much more effective for anyone to adhere to the standards, which are essential in that sense. policies. What are the necessarily existing policies that can be maximized for alignment? What are the policies that exist that are actually holding back this alignment? Because there are policies in the books now that don't help an investor or an asset owner to align its resources. And what are the gaps of policies that we need to put together globally and nationally going forward? The third one that Naveed had mentioned is the notion of instruments, right? What are the variation of existing instruments, and what are the innovations of financial instruments that need to put it in place that allow this alignment to take place better? So those are the three pillars of the framework that we're putting together. And for each one of those pillars, concrete recommendations of next actions are being designed and will be presented in the next 3 weeks going forward. Now, another piece of work that UNDP has been doing it for a while, which links back to that pillar of standards that I just mentioned to you, is a work around designing specifically standards for specific asset classes in terms of generating that compatibility, that alignment with the SDGs. We spent about 18 months researching the market and finding out that the market has a series of excellent principles. As I mentioned, the principle for responsible investment, the IFC principles for impact investment, our colleagues at UNEPFI principles for responsible banking, and so on and so forth. The world has also moved quite a long way in terms of reporting on non-financial metrics. The Global Reporting Initiative, SASB, and others. But what we realized is that there is a gap in the marketplace that helps a private equity or a bond issuer or an enterprise, which is the three set of standards that we are designing, connected the big principles to the daily practices of investment, which then will lead to better reporting. And that is the principles that we've created. Right now, we have principles for private equity that was already in the market. Having gone through 9 months of public consultation, we are in the second round of public consultation on bond issuers and starting the consultation on enterprise. Now, he asked me about the integrate national financial frameworks, which it is a very, very important work that we are leading together with Naveed and our colleagues at DESA. This is a mechanism that was defined at the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. And what happened is, Naveed and his team did a fantastic research and looking at all the voluntary national reviews that had been presented by governments to the high-level political forum, the monitors, the progress of the SDGs, and realized that we had somehow won the planning battle, if you want to, in that sense, consider. So most development plans at national level, one way or another, have incorporated the SDGs as the basis, as the element of this. However, very few of those plans had a financing strategy behind, had an element that allows a government to say, if this is my plan, this is how much it costs, and here are the sources of money, public and private, that we're going to use, that's, in other words, this is the way of paying for that. And I think the INFF is in an attempted to move towards that direction and putting in place the necessary financial strategies going forward. We are UNDP, and if you see the circle in the middle here is the INFF circle with 4 modules, and Naveed team leading the interagency task force is designing those modules, and we are contributing to this. One of the tools that we at UNDP have that serves as an element of allowing us to assess for each one of those models where progress is in a country's development financial assessments. And we've done this in more than 40 countries around the world as UNDP, and it's an assessment contribution to the roadmaps of putting together an INFF. At the moment, we are working with many other partners, UN agencies. We are partnering in some countries with the IMF on 58 countries around the world where we are starting to advance together with our resident coordinators colleagues on INFS. Another element of our own work in UNDP, which contributed to this, is work on the methodological ways on strategic budget tagging, SDG costing, subnational budget, and accountability. For us at UNDP, the budget becomes an important element to advance that financial strategy of the INFF, as well as a budget as a tool to provide necessarily enabling environment incentives for the private sector to align capital nationally and internationally to development plans that now linked to the economic recoveries of COVID and the SDG going forward. Now, let me just end it by saying this wheel here, the total action of areas that UNDP works on finance for development. You know, we presented you three specifically products and three specifically areas of work, but we actually have a much larger public and private capital alignment work across all of our organizations. And you can find it, all of our work in this website where we have it put together to our teams around the world, as well as to the larger community, all the sets of tools and expertise that we have, and they're all available here to advance the areas that I presented to you as the other ones that we do going forward. Thierry, I hope that I'm being able to, you know, touch a little bit about how all this conversation is being implemented at the global and national level through specific initiatives and partnerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed, Marcos, for this presentation of this extensive work under your leadership at UNDP on financing sustainable development along these three key initiatives and area of work that are the alignments of capital with the SDGs, the SDGs impact instruments, and last but not least, the INFFs that are a key tool to align the financing strategy with the national development strategy of developing countries in order to build back better and to achieve the 2030 agenda. Now, I would like to turn to Dr. Afnan. When it comes to mobilization of finance, it's even more critical to take into account national circumstances, priorities, and specificities. In the context of Saudi Arabia, you have been leading a research on the contribution of OCAF to the realization of the Vision 2030 and the SDGs. Could you tell us about the findings of your study in terms of mobilization and alignment of finance with these endowments and funds?
Sure, yes. Thank you, Thierry, and hi, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I'm really honored to be with the Sustainable Development Champions in this event, and happy to talk about OCAF as an inclusive source of sustainable financing for SDGs. I'm happy to share some initial findings of a study conducted by the Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector and the United Nations. The title of the study is Awqaf for Vision 2030 and SDG in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is considered one of the top countries in terms of charitable giving. The country's annual philanthropy giving was estimated to be 1.5 to 2% of the country's GDP, compared to 0.5 to 1% in most Western countries. But while the kingdom's generosity is impressive, the impact of giving remains in question. And through my PhD research on Saudi charitable foundations, I found that while most giving is directed to development fields like health, education, etc., they do not aim to achieve clear objectives for impact. And therefore maximizing the impact of nonprofit sector has become a national priority, as it's clearly stated in one of Vision 2030 goals that more than 1/3 of our nonprofit organizations projects should have measurable and deep social impact. So the question today is how can we link or direct Awqaf funds toward achieving sustainable development goals more effectively, which is the mission of this ICD UNDP research project with 5 key objectives. First, to estimate the potential contribution that Awqaf and KSA can make in financing the Vision 2030 and SDGs, to provide a conceptual framework for this alignment, to discuss challenges to be overcome, and provide actionable recommendations. Now, we're still in the process of gathering more robust and official data about Awqaf in Saudi Arabia. But from reviewing published sources and having personal communications with Awqaf stakeholders, we found several estimations, like in terms of Awqaf total numbers, ranging from 33 to 120,000 Awqaf entities. In terms of total assets, ranging from 70 billion to 500 billion Saudi riyals. And in terms of return on investment, so return on investment is considered low and do not exceed 5% of the assets of the Awqaf assets value, and estimated at 325 million riyals. Awqaf fields of work were estimated based on a recent study on Saudi charitable foundations, which is a common form of Awqaf-based institutions in Saudi Arabia. The study reveals the expanding role of Awqaf in various sectors, including education as the most funded area, human service as the next most funded area. Health was also identified as a key focus area. The environment, arts, and culture were less of a focus. And here are some examples of the largest Awqaf in Saudi Arabia, including King Abdulaziz Waqf with 28 billion riyals of assets, Awqaf Sulaiman bin Abdulaziz al-Rajhi with 50 billion riyals in assets, Awqaf al-Musa with 1.3 billion riyals in assets, and the Al-Jabr Charitable Foundation with 700 million riyals in assets. And we highlighted prominent examples of Awqaf with potential SDG alignment. For example, SDG 10, reduced inequality. So Awqaf historically played key roles in taking care of the most vulnerable groups. I think with proper empowering strategies, such efforts could be aligned with SDG 10. For instance, there are 2 Awqaf funds in Saudi Arabia, Al-Inma Awqaf Fund for Orphans Care and Insan Fund have been recently established in partnership with local banks with more than 150 million riyals to create collective Waqf funds for supporting orphan societies. Also, Saudi Arabia, especially the western region of Saudi Arabia, is dotted with robats, free housing facilities developed hundreds of years ago in the form of Awqaf to provide homes for the most disadvantaged, like the elderly. Awqaf for quality education. So higher education is mentioned in target 4.3 of SDG 4. And between 2005 and 2007, Saudi universities took advantage of Awqaf to provide additional income. And among those experiences, we have King Saud University, Awqaf, with 4.9 billion riyals in assets. King Fahad University of Petroleum and Minerals, Awqaf, with 1.5 billion riyals. And King Abdulaziz University Scientific Waqf with 300 million riyals in Awqaf assets or capital. Another Awqaf-based education institutions is Al-Batarji Family Waqf, which was established in 1985 with a current focus of investing in educating the gifted and creative school students to empower them to become leaders of positive change. It's such a nice focus. Awqaf for strong and resilient societies. So as we all know, COVID-19 made the achievement of development goals more challenging. Realizing this, the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development, the General Authority of Awqaf, Civil Societies Council, Civil Foundations Council, and a number of Awqaf institutions, individual donors and companies established this 500 million riyals community fund called the Sunduq al-Mujtama'i as a civil society initiative supporting the government's efforts in mitigating the impacts of COVID-19, particularly for the segments of society most in need or most affected. Similarly, the Ministry of Health launched the Health Endowment Fund, Al-Waqf Al-Sahhi, which received more than 1 billion donations from about 300 entities from a variety of sectors. Awqaf for the protection of cultural heritage. Some Awqaf in Saudi Arabia are funding activities that are aligned with SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, particularly Target 4 to protect and safeguard the world's cultural heritage. So for example, Saleh Hamza Sayrafi Foundation was founded with 15 million Waqf assets with unique contributions toward preserving monuments, art and crafts and heritage of the Mecca city. Awqaf for sustainable agriculture. As the Saudi population continues to grow, much more effort is needed to sustainably increase agriculture production, right? And recognizing this, Awqaf Abdullah Suleiman has embraced the creation of a 1 billion award that supports date palm agriculture research. Another example is the Sheikh Saleh bin Abdulaziz Al-Rashhi, who endowed huge farms with an investment strategy in organic farming and usage of solar energy. It actually received the EcoCert certification in 2007 for its environmental and social impacts. We also highlighted prominent examples of Awqaf with potential Vision 2030 alignment, such as Nama Al-Munawwara Awqaf, which is dedicated to empowering small and medium enterprises, SMEs, Al-Majdu'i and Al-Rawhali foundations providing microfinance and incubators to economically empower youth from poor families. Awqaf for housing solutions, such as Awqaf Al-Majid and Hayat Charitable Foundation. Awqaf for good health and well-being, such as Awqaf Abdullah Taha Bakhsh, which spends around 85 million riyals annually to sponsor research centers and healthcare clinics in specialized healthcare fields. Awqaf for enhancing social responsibility and developing, the infrastructure of the Saudi social sector in general, such as Awqaf Noor al-Mulahi and Prince Al-Anud Foundation and Al-Aradi Charitable Awqaf. We conducted in-depth interviews with more than 25 individuals representing the different Awqaf stakeholders and concluded 12 key challenges to be overcome in Vision 2030 and SDG alignment. And challenges in alignment of purposes, including unclear roles in relation to other institutions, legal difficulties in adjusting existing Awqaf purposes, weak governance and boards' involvement in strategy among Awqaf, lack of information on local priorities for local regions. And there are challenges in alignment of projects, Awqaf projects with the development goals, including lack of information on what works for local communities, difficulties in changing organizational processes and cultures, scarcity of specialized human resources, access to impact management tools. And there were also some challenges in alignment of investments, which includes, Awqaf preference for low-risk investments, legal difficulties in changing the investments of Awqaf, access to impact investment tools and experts, and availability of impact investment opportunities. Of course, the study is a team effort, consists of Dr. Ahmed Habib from Durham University Business School in the UK, Mohammed Al-Yami from ICD, Natalie from the UN office in Saudi Arabia, and Amir Rahman from UNDP, as well as a strong supportive advisory committee consisting of key Awqaf stakeholders in Saudi Arabia. Thank you all for listening, and happy to discuss more about this research.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Afnan, for this very instructive presentation of OCAF. That is an important source of finance for social impact. And what I really appreciated in your presentation is that you aim to address all the aspects of the social impact, whether it is about the support of the civil society organizations, but also infrastructure for the social sector. There are, it seems, many challenges to overcome to further align OCAF with the SDGs and the 2030 agenda and the Vision 2030. Sorry, but I think it's very interesting to notice that it's something that is well taken into consideration. As we are a bit behind in our schedule, I would like to have a very short Q&A session. And let me start with a session with a question that came from the live stream chat by Mohammed Hayub. And I would like to ask you, the four of you, this question. It is quite a challenging question. During this period, this challenging period, how can national leaders reconcile the need to finance sustainable development with the need to restart their economies? Is there any trade-off between the two? Who would like to pick up this question?
Can I just quickly jump here? I actually don't think that there is a trade-off between restarting the economy and sustainable development. I actually think the future lies on how do we, bring sustainable development into the global economy, so build back better in here. I think what COVID has shown is the weaknesses of the current system in which we operate today. Inequality, for example, the so-called essential workers that have all been keeping us during lockdowns and work and are not able to make a decent salary or any element like this. The limitations of the planet for the way the system of economic growth has been going on. So for me, I don't necessarily see a trade-off between investing for sustainable development and economic growth. I think that is the future.
Thierry, could I also add a few points?
Yes, but please, step in.
It's an excellent question, and I get it all the time. So I'm glad this has been raised here. It's not at all an either-or choice. And I'll give you very practical examples. But first, let me mention, after a long time, I have seen, and I call it fiscal activism, that governments are being asked to spend, even if they are facing budget deficits, but spend in quality investments. And look what this health, Marcos very well covered. I just want to give you the example of education sector. Look at the opportunity you are getting. This crisis has shifted the way we impart education. It has its pros and cons, pluses and minuses. It's an opportunity for all governments to redesign their education systems, expand access, make them more effective, and come up with a hybrid model of in-person and online instructions. So just if you start investing right now to respond to the crisis by expanding access to digital technology, but also start designing a future education system in your own country, which expands access, and it's also effective in delivering the service. So actually, this is the time to redesign, rethink, and reimagine. So while you are responding to the crisis, you are also recovering in a far better manner than you could have done with the existing systems that are available to you. The systems are disrupted, so let's redesign them. Thank you, Thierry.
Thank you. I would like to ask you a question about cooperation, because we have many stakeholders around the table, not this table, but the table of the debate around financing sustainable development. And one of the key outcome of this crisis is that we need to cooperate further. We need to strengthen our cooperation to address the key challenges of this crisis. So how can we strengthen the cooperation, the collaboration between all stakeholders? And first and foremost, between the G20, that is the group of the most powerful countries, the premier forum for economic international cooperation for its members, and the United Nations that bring all the nations together. So it must be, in my sense, it's key. It's a key question that we need to address in order to strengthen our policy action and the financing sustainable development agenda to advance it in a way that address the crisis. Who would like to pick up on this question?
Yeah, Thierry, if I could, because we are working at the global level, and as you mentioned, I also have the honor to represent the UN as a Deputy Sherpa on financial track. It's an unfortunate phase in the existence of humanity on this planet, what we are going through. But let me share with you the silver lining. G20, without wasting a moment, came together through an emergency summit and finance ministers meeting to find solutions. And they immediately engaged with the UN Secretary General when he decided to convene emergency gathering at the end of May. So the crisis has driven many key actors to come together for multilateral solutions, despite the difficult geopolitical environment. I want to mention one more thing, and I should stop there. After this, I saw in 2013, after the financial crisis, I saw all actors looking towards the UN, and that's why we had the SDGs and Addis Ababa Action Agenda. This time again, all key actors came running towards the UN. Civil society and financing for development, if you have a chance, read their letter to the Secretary General, what they wanted the UN to do. For the first time, as far as I recall, 30 CEOs managing $16 trillion rushed to the UN, rallied around the Secretary General. So the demand for collective action is very high. Thank you, Thierry.
Thank you so much, Navid. Haifa, would you like to react?
Well, I don't have much to add to what my fellow panelists has said. I think they have covered it quite beautifully. But I think the key also to focus on, as Navid have said, how can we engage various stakeholders, whether they are private sector or whether they are non-governmental or civil society, so that we can focus on inclusive recovery to overcome this crisis. Another thing is how can we increase the dialogue in the multilateral field about unleashing productivity? How can we invest in building capacity so that we can ensure resilience, not only to overcome this current crisis, but to ensure resilience towards future crises if they happen.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think that with it, we reached the end of our session. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers who contributed to our conversation and who brought very instructive and insightful ideas. The international cooperation is key in this moment. And I think that the political will was shown during this session. So let's move it forward. Hand it over now to our Master of Ceremony, Aliash.
Thank you so much, Thierry. All the best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thierry Sorey. I would also like to thank the panelists, moderator, and participants for taking part in the discussions on the first thematic session. Because we are running a little bit behind schedule, we will skip the break and continue the agenda. So we will continue with the screening of the UN-75 film entitled "The Future We Want, the UN We Need."
Our world is facing unprecedented challenges. Climate change is altering natural balance. And our precious wildlife is struggling to survive. We are battling a new era of conflict and violence. There's the disruptive impact from digital technologies and shifting demographics with gaping inequalities. Now, a global epidemic is reshaping our world as we know it. We are at a crossroad at a time when our world seems so divided. Our world is struggling to breathe. For the United Nations 75th anniversary, we set out to ask the world, what are your hopes for your future?
If you could choose one thing to say to the UN, to world leaders about the future, what would that be?
In January 2020, the United Nations launched a global initiative to have the world's largest conversation on the future we want. Discussions have taken place in all settings, from classrooms to boardrooms, parliaments to village halls across the world, in order to reach as many people as possible. The United Nations listened, and the world spoke.
Justice, equality, and freedom for all.
People can really be in peace and with dignity, because our dignity was taken away from us because of our religion and because of who we are. And I hope that we are the last community who are suffering of those problems.
Health is often looked at as an expense. It is not. It is an investment.
We change by exchanging without losing ourselves.
We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
If we don't stop the destruction of our natural world, nothing else will matter.
More than ever before, we need solidarity, hope, and the political will to see this crisis through together.
From what we have heard, the world is not as divided as we thought. The global economy, healthcare, sanitation, education, and the hardest places hit are our top priorities from recovering from the pandemic. In response to COVID-19, greater international solidarity is urgently needed. The threat of climate change and destruction of our natural environment is the biggest fear for the future. We need increased efforts to reduce conflict and violence, and we aspire to further protect human rights. For optimism about our future, we need to look to our young people. The overwhelming majority of us believe global cooperation is more vital than ever.
Every time we fail to find solutions to global challenges, the most vulnerable people in our societies are hit the hardest.
Throughout history, we have accomplished unimaginable things, propelling each generation further than the last. There is no limit to the amount of good we can achieve together to make this world, our world, a better place. The challenges before us are universal, and we know that these challenges demand global solutions. We have the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The Sustainable Development Goals. In 2045, the United Nations 100th year, let's see the change we have implemented today that will shine a light on our children's tomorrow.
Change is coming. The real power belongs to the people.
And I want to turn the question inside out as well. I will not ask, how dare you? Instead, I will ask, do you dare to?
This is the most urgent of times and the most urgent of messages. Now must be our moment for action.
The conference now proceeds to the thematic session 2, which is on promoting health and human capital in the wake of COVID-19. This session aims to address the issue of the greatest reversal of human capital development due to the COVID-19 crisis, which, if nothing is done, threatens lives and livelihoods and disrupts decades of progress in quality healthcare and education. This crisis strengthens the urgent need to invest in human capital as a means to unlock society's full potential. As before, I would like to inform the audience that we will be taking comments and questions from the participants at the end of this thematic panel in a Q&A session. The comments and questions can already be posted now and during the thematic panel using the live chat section right of the video stream or using the link below the live stream. The second thematic session will be moderated by Dr. Sameh El-Samarty, Program Leader for Human Development in the GCC, World Bank. I would like to invite Dr. Sameh El-Samarty to initiate discussions under thematic session 2, promoting health and human capital in the wake of COVID-19. Please.
Thank you, Aljaz. Good morning, good afternoon, Your Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished guests and participants, and thanks for joining us for the second thematic session of the virtual UNDAY on promoting health and human capital in the wake of COVID-19. At the outset, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Nathalie Fustière and Thierry Sauret, for inviting me to moderate this session. Excuse me. As Aljaz mentioned, the objective of this session is to explore how local and international organizations and communities can leverage the potential of human capital to achieve sustainable development and recover better from the COVID-19 crisis. For this session, we have a distinguished panel who will provide different perspectives and share their insights on this topic. In the order that they will present, first, we have Dr. Edward Kelly, who is the director of the World Health Organization's Integrated Health Services Department, which aims to support countries to provide equitable access to integrated health services that are effective, safe, people-centered, and based on a primary healthcare approach. Second, we'll have Dr. Louis Pearson, who is the Acting Associate Director and Chief of Health Program at UNICEF headquarters in New York. In this role, she provides strategic leadership, management support, and overall direction to UNICEF's Global Health Program. Third, we have Her Highness Princess Nouf bint Mohammed bin Abdullah Al Saud, excuse me, who is the chair of the official G20 Saudi Arabia 2020's Civil Society Engagement Group and the CEO of the King Khalid Foundation. Princess Nouf has been a long-standing philanthropist and a strong supporter of civil society and its growth in Saudi Arabia. And fourth, we have Professor Ayman Abdu, who is the Secretary General of the Saudi Commission for Health Specialties and has extensive experience in education as well as research, and is a board member of many regulatory, educational, and healthcare organizations. And finally, we will be having Professor Ines Alaissa, who is the president of Princess Noura bint Abdulrahman University, the largest all-women university in the world. As a second-generation female academic leader herself, Professor Laisa holds empowering Saudi women as a personal objective of hers. Professor Laisa holds a PhD degree in anatomy and neurobiology and is a well-established researcher in her field. So let me welcome them and thank them for joining us today to share their perspectives and insights. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Edward Kelly, Director of Integrated Health Services at WHO, to share his perspective on how WHO is leading and coordinating global efforts to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and what can be done differently to prepare for emergencies and make progress towards universal health coverage to prevent future crises. Dr. Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'll just make sure that you can hear me all right, but please interrupt me if not. But yes. Excellencies, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. So Excellencies and Your Highnesses and distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to be here and also to be on such a distinguished panel, also to be here with my colleague Li Wei, with whom I work very closely, sort of almost every day. The UNICEF and WHO are working on this crisis together. So in advance, I'm deferring all difficult questions to her for the panel Q&A afterwards. But if I could just provide a brief framing for our discussion here, which I think is appropriate for WHO. Our chair very nicely framed my peacetime role. For the pandemic, I was asked for WHO stand up a team that looks at the continuity of essential health services during the pandemic, which has become known as Pillar 9 of the Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan. And it's a microcosm of the larger questions that we're considering here today about how we continue our work, lives, and labor in the current pandemic. So just a quick word about the current situation, because there's been a bit of divergence. If you look at the different epidemic curves for the different regions around 6 regions of the UN, WHO's regions around the world, they're very different in terms of how they look. When we started this outbreak, there were many colleagues, close colleagues of mine, who provided extensive and detailed and very learned models of how the epidemic would roll out across different countries. In effect, on average, those models weren't necessarily wrong, but they have applied literally almost to no one country because the situations are really quite different. But globally, the idea that we have moved past into some new phase is true, but a bit dangerous one. We have had our worst 24 hours in the past 24 hours since the start of the outbreak. 445,000 cases in 24 hours is more cases than we've had since we first discovered COVID-19. We have had 6.5 thousand deaths over this period, which is another not top, but is a big spike in terms of deaths. Our worst week since the start of the outbreak was last week. The worst week before that was the week before. So clearly, and in the region of the Eastern Mediterranean region, we have had the second worst day since the start of the outbreak. Now, obviously, we cannot compare exactly the last 24 hours with some 24-hour period in January or February or March. We weren't doing anywhere near the number of tests, but it's quite clear we are not headed in a desirable direction. In terms of the work that WHO has tried to look at, it has been both on the response and trying to help countries with basic work on infection prevention and lab capacity and as well as contact tracing and other basics of public health. But we've also been looking at, in particular, the interruption of essential health services. And like I said, this has become Pillar 9 of the Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan. It's also a key portion of the UN's Global Humanitarian Response Plan. And it is the link, in effect, to the UN framework on the socioeconomic response, which has been an important element that we have also taken forward and for which I was one of the key authors. The impact of COVID-19 on health services has been significant, and WHO's recently conducted a survey to assess this magnitude and is getting ready to repeat that survey globally. But across a wide range of countries, 105 countries in all regions, there is a major disruption across a wide range of health services, everything from routine immunization services and outreach services, which were disrupted. 70% of countries stated that were severely disrupted, to NCD services, sexual and reproductive health services, cancer services, but even essential emergency care, emergency blood transfusion also interrupted. Overall, 50% of health services across the world were partially or severely disrupted during the first phase of this pandemic. So the examination of how to maintain those health services was a big focus for WHO, UNICEF, and others. We came out with guidance very early on in the pandemic to assist countries in strategizing about what was that essential package of services that needed to be maintained. How do you surge health workers and other essential diagnostics and medicines to be able to continue those services? And then how do you look at sort of the pieces that need to be behind that, the supply chain, the health financing, and other elements that are the foundations of safe healthcare delivery. The key element going forward will be how we are able to take this work into a new phase. And one of the elements of that will be how well we are able to ensure health and social worker safety and protection. This was, with big thanks to the government of Saudi Arabia, but all governments around the world, a focus for WHO in its recent World Patient Safety Day on September 17th, where monuments around the world were lit up in orange, and WHO and other organizations focused on the issue that we will never have safe patients during this pandemic, but even afterwards, until we are ensured that we have safe health workers. Globally, what we announced on September 17th was around 14% of COVID cases that were reported to WHO were among health workers. Now we're seeing a bit better numbers, more closer to 10%, but some countries we've seen as high as 35%, and this is clearly far too many health workers being infected. And this World Patient Safety Day, again, that's been strongly supported by the government of Saudi Arabia and also strongly supported by the G20 and some of its action items. WHO launched a charter on health worker safety where we invited all countries, hospitals, clinics, and partners to endorse and implement with actions related to connecting policies on patient safety and health worker safety, developing national programs, protecting health workers from violence in the workplace, improving mental health and psychological well-being of health workers, and protecting health workers from physical and biological hazards. So I'll just finish my comments with coming back to the point raised earlier very well by our previous panel, the colleagues from UNDP and others with whom we enjoy a great working relationship in the region and in Saudi Arabia around this concept of solidarity, and that the ACT Accelerator is one of the key action areas. That is the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator that provides the platform for multiple partners working with countries to ensure equitable access to diagnostics, therapeutics, and importantly, vaccines. This will be a key piece of work going forward. We're also working with the World Bank on this. And this concept of solidarity at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals is essential. But I'd like to just finish on that concept that we are now in a new phase of the pandemic. We can see even just with health that the idea of not providing mental health and substance abuse services or continuing to not provide dental services is not possible over the next year or 2 years. We have to redefine what is essential. it's quite clear that the virus can be controlled. We showed it this past year. Many countries still show it now, whether it be Vietnam, Thailand, other places that have strong emphasis on public health measures. We have the tools, but the virus has also shown that if we don't use those tools and we don't control it, it will control us. We have to examine how we move forward as a UN family, implementing this health first approach that is part of the UN framework, and at the heart of that UN framework. It does not read health only, it reads health first. There must be a way that we restart essential economic, social service activity safely, and find ways to do that, learning from countries, and the platform of the G20 and the UN is a perfect platform to do that. Chair, I hand it back to you with thanks for the opportunity to join me.
Chair, would you like me to continue?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Kelly, for a very rich overview of the WHO efforts, particularly on ensuring continuity of health services, as well as the need for redefining the essential health services to include mental and dental health services, among other things. Okay, now let me move to Dr. Louis Pearson, Principal Advisor for Health at UNICEF, to make a presentation on how UNICEF is controlling the transmission of COVID-19 among children, women, and vulnerable populations, and addressing the immediate socio-economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in the areas of WASH, health, nutrition, education, social protection, and essential social services. Dr. Pearson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Please confirm you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the broader framing, Ed, and the daily collaboration between us, and thank you very much. I want to, in the next few minutes, focus on the, my screen is not moving. Focus on the health and nutrition and education services in COVID-19. At the beginning of the pandemic, all of us remember the modeling exercise done by several academic institutions, projected that if there is severe interruption of essential health services, we could lose up to 6,000 additional lives among young children every day. 6,000 is a big number, and it's scary that it happens every day. So several months into the pandemic, UNICEF and WHO looked at how the essential services have been impacted. And I'm going to show you two tracer indicators. The first is institutional delivery, women giving birth in health facilities. We compared the 2020 Q2, which is April to June data, with the same period of 2019. And we have seen the patterns of interruption differ significantly in the world. Bangladesh, Haiti, Bolivia reported very severe interruption. Nearly a third or 50% of women stopped coming to, less women coming to health facilities to give birth. Versus the other extreme, there are some African countries reported increase. So what does this pattern tell us in terms of different bottlenecks, different situations, and how we support countries differently? And the immunization services is the same, the interruption pattern, if we use Panta 3 as a indication. Again, the variation is quite significant across the world. And there are several factors may affect the severity, either it is the caseload. If we look at Bangladesh, Pakistan, South Asian countries have much higher caseload per million population than many of the African countries. So we must tailor our response to the country's IP situation. Most importantly, we found the recovery pattern is also quite different. I'm just using Zimbabwe as one example. In the blue bar is 2019 and the orange is 2020. The immunization services on the right-hand side, you can see a V-shaped recovery pattern. After the initial interruption in April, in May, June, and July, and we hope it continues in Q3, the immunization coverage is catching up. But on the left-hand side, the women giving birth in health facilities, the V shape has not taken place. What it tells us is that outreach and the community-based services might have been interrupted earlier, but also easier to recover. And the services relying on health systems that needs longer time and more effort from all of us to sustain and recover. I also want to talk about the visible and the invisible deaths. Yes, we did lose more than 1 million deaths, and these are very painful to the families due to COVID-19. But let us not forget, every year we lose more than 5 million under 5 mortality, including 2.5 million newborn deaths in the first 28 days after birth from largely preventable causes, and 2.4 million stillbirths and 400,000 maternal deaths. These numbers are not talked about by the media every day, but I don't want to forget this. Moving on to education. Schools, a lot of the schools were closed during lockdown. And we know that children are affected not directly by the disease in terms of mortality, but indirectly through school closure and their mental health status. So it is really important for UNICEF to work with countries should a country want to prioritize school reopening as part of the economic reopening, right? We believe that this should be prioritized. We did a quick survey from 139 countries by our education sectors. We have seen that 40% of countries that answered have already a plan to reopening schools. But there's many other countries do not have a plan yet in August 2020 to reopen schools. And what are we doing to make school a safer place? Apart from keeping social distance, but also perhaps testing the teachers, especially the older teachers, making hand washing possible, make school health a reality, and make classroom a more friendly place, and stagger learning, and starting from younger children to older children, and the way of learning from the countries. And here are some concrete examples that in Senegal, UNICEF is helping the government to supply schools with essential commodities and 6,000 public health schools opened. And the story goes on in Albania, in China, and in Vietnam, and in Africa, and to Latin America. Just the learning and how to keep school safe is not necessarily a north to south dialogue as the past. It's more south to south collaboration, how countries can learn from each other. And I'm really glad that UNDP, and with the host of this meeting, the Saudi Kingdom, and the other UN agencies are collaborating with countries to facilitate the joint learning. And I think I'll stop here, and I can share the slides with others, with you offline, that I have more information on nutrition, on child protection, but I'll stop here and ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pearson, for your presentation. That really highlighted the devastating impact of COVID-19 on both maternal and child health services, as well as UNICEF's efforts to support safely reopening schools and ensuring continued learning and safety of students. Thank you very much for that. Now I have the honor to invite Her Highness Princess Noof bint Mohammed bin Abdullah Al Saud, C20 Chair, to make her presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on civil society organizations and the role of C20 in supporting these organizations to recover better in the COVID-19 era and beyond. Your Highness, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And thank you for the honor of being among these illustrious members of the panel. And to start, so Your Excellencies, on behalf of the C20 Steering Committee and the 1,500 members of the Civil Society 20, I would like to thank Her Excellency Nathalie Forestier, the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Saudi Arabia, and her fantastic team for the continuous support and solidarity they've showed to the C20 and the local Saudi civil society. Their support started with the preparation for the preparatory boot camp last year and continued with the C20 summit this month, which had a strong UN representation. So as the official engagement mechanism of civil society in the G20 process, the C20 advocates for sustainable development and for supporting UN-centered multilateralism. And so it is my honor to speak again to you today on the issue of promoting health and human capital in the wake of COVID-19, and also to share civil society's perspective on the matter. And since I was asked to address the impact of COVID-19 on civil society organizations and our role in supporting NGOs and the communities they serve, I would like to share a few contributions from the C20 this year through its dedicated policy advocacy. As civil society, we continuously call for the role of NGOs to be recognized as part of the response efforts to the crises, and we also call for the NGOs to be part of the crisis management decision-making process. Additionally, we ask that NGOs be included as beneficiaries of the stimulus packages. I believe that NGOs are best positioned to channel the demands of their local communities and speak on their behalf and behalf of those left behind by promoting health and human capital. In April 2020, we ran a global survey for NGOs to investigate the impact of the crisis on their operations, and we published the findings in our knowledge brief on the C20 website. The survey showed a significant increase in the demands for NGO services, coupled with a considerable decrease in funding. You can see there the numbers are quite concerning. And we also note that NGOs face difficulties adjusting to working remotely and are in serious need for public funding to survive. I think in Saudi Arabia we've gone a long way, and banks have now allowed for complete online banking services, which was not the case before, and this will go a long way to helping with the situation in general of NGOs. In June of 2020, we published our C20 policy pack, which included 11 policy papers to all the relevant G20 working groups. And we channeled global civil society's concerns and demands around issues of global health, education, employment, and social protection, as well as civic spaces. These are concerns we've always had. These are legacy concerns, but the crisis has just amplified the systemic issues we have. So we called for G20 countries to provide access to CSOs, to emergency funds in the same manner provided to business entities and corporations. It's always a concern to us where the economic recovery is. It's mostly going to the financial sector. We also asked them to commit to policies that facilitate the legal creation operations of CSOs. We asked for them to reverse the financial exclusions of nonprofit organizations due to the risks and cost aversions by banks, and I spoke about this just previously. And we asked them to adopt policies to enable mechanisms to create sustainable partnerships for development to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Agendas. We believe it's a three-pronged, not process, but there are three levels of society. You've got business, you've got governments, and you've got civil society that all need to take a part in this process. We also joined forces with other engagement groups to call the G20 into action. We worked early on with B20, L20, W20, T20, and Y20 through joint statements published the first week of March to call for global pandemic preparedness, health system strengthening, as well as access to education and employment services. We collectively expressed to the G20 that investments in education, employment, social protection, and human capital should not be undermined during the COVID response, rather that we should learn from previous crises and deliver on human security needs for members of our society, especially the most vulnerable. We also urged G20 countries to help the Global South in its crisis response by providing debt relief, financing, and assistance. Additionally, this year, we opened a dialogue with the G20 finance track, speaking directly to finance ministers and central bank governors on the need of G20 countries to bridge financing gaps to realize an effective and coordinated global response. Such a response must be multilateral in its approach and with a central role given to the WHO and the ACT accelerator. Finally, our C20 summit, which concluded 2 weeks ago, had strong emphasis on economic and social justice, as well as the right response and recovery from COVID-19 during the summit. We hosted 65 sessions and 380 speakers that spoke passionately about sustainable development to an audience of more than 35,000 online attendees. Our speakers were inspiring change makers who came together to advocate to the G20. And we thank the UN experts who participated on the panels where we discussed the argument for sustainable development in the finance track. We also convened a meeting on the need for a people's vaccine and the role of communities in health emergencies and the need for a global public health convention fit for the 21st century. And on the last day of the summit, we submitted our C20 communique to the G20 presidency, summarizing our policy asks to the G20 leaders. Our 2020 communique also echoed the demands to adopt just policies for inclusive recovery, restore faith in the UN-centered multilateralism, and attend immediately to the climate and ecological crises. We also asked for the cancellation of debt on developing countries to allow for enough fiscal space for the Global South to respond to the crises. And we also asked G20 leaders to commit to a people's vaccine, making any breakthrough in an effective vaccine an immediate public good. we demand that world leaders allocate 1% of domestic fiscal stimulus spending to the global response. The global response has been amazing, but then again, if you just do some research, and you more than I know that some countries are paying back in debt more than what they have received, and some countries are paying back, I think it's like Guatemala, and they have not even received any aid. So this is something that we feel strongly about, and we feel will go a long way to alleviate some of the problems, the systemic problems that we have now. And then I would like to finally thank all of you for the time you gave me to share civil society's voice on today's topic, and I look forward to continuing our dialogue and shared advocacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Highness, for an excellent overview of the efforts and the role of the G20, both in highlighting the impact of COVID-19 on the civil service organizations, the NGOs, particularly in terms of increased demand, but also the lack of funding, the different paper that the G20 has provided to the G20, all the other global events and summits that the G20 has led to support the NGO community. And let me join your voice in supporting the call for having the NGOs both as partners as well as beneficiaries of the stimulus packages. So again, thank you, Your Highness. And now I would like to call upon our next speaker, and there will be a slight change in the order because Her Excellency, Professor Ines El Issa may have to leave a little bit early. I have the pleasure to invite Her Excellency Professor Ines El Issa, Rector of the Princess Noura bint Abdul Rahman University, to make a presentation on how Saudi Arabia is addressing the disruption in the education system due to COVID-19 and the role of the university in supporting faculty and students, including women, and investing in distance learning and virtual educational platforms. Professor El Issa, Your Excellency, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Sameh. I just want to verify, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Loud and clear.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sameh. And I want to begin by thanking Her Excellency Nathalie Postier for inviting me to be among those esteemed panelists today, and congratulations on the anniversary of the UN. It's such a privilege to be here with you today. And among the policymakers who spoke today, I decided to be the storyteller. And since the OECD just published a paper on how COVID pandemic is changing education with a perspective from Saudi Arabia, and it has a holistic look on the efforts taken by the country in general education and higher education, I'd like to focus today on the story of women post COVID pandemic. And to begin with, one second, my screen is not, okay. Just to put a little bit of perspective, we're talking about education of women in Saudi Arabia that only started 60 years ago. And through the 60 years went through different evolutionary milestones, but the biggest was with the launch of the country's Vision 2030, which was launched in 2016. The vision clearly stated that women are a key pillar in the National Development Plan and have put forward a number of interventions to promote the women enrollment in development. So today I'm going to talk about the current status of women in education, in health, in economy, and in technology, and how COVID-19 impacted these sectors. We know as of today that more than 50% of students are females in general education, more than 50% of teachers are females, more than 50% of schools are for females, and in higher education, the story is even greater in favor of women. We have 57% of higher education graduates are females, and we have even larger number of females than males in health majors, and we're closing the gap between boys and girls in STEM disciplines. The country holds a large, extensive scholarship program, sending Saudi scholars abroad. And as of today, we have 43% of Saudi students studying abroad in graduate programs are females. And as of now as well, 45% of faculty in Saudi universities are females. And in this epidemic, we have almost over 39% of healthcare workers in Saudi Arabia who are also females at the frontier of facing this pandemic. The country has shown the largest growth in women participation in labor market among the G20 countries, with 7% increase. In 2019, the percentage was 23%, and we see that with the government proactive interventions supporting the enrollment of women, we haven't seen a decline. Instead, as of the first quarter of 2020, the enrollment increased to 25%. In entrepreneurship, 31% of entrepreneurs are females, with a growth of 47% in the last few years. And we see that women are more engaged in entrepreneurial activities and education than males. In technology, I think the country of Saudi Arabia has a lucrative story to show in terms of the percentage of women in IT. We have over 50% of graduates from schools of technology who are females, higher than anywhere around in the world. The percentage of faculty as well in schools of computer sciences is very high compared to other places in the world. So those women have played a key role in the transformation to e-learning platforms, designing the curricula, reinventing the learning experiences for the students, educating the faculty, all kinds of faculty, the young, the scholars, to be engaged in e-learning platforms. So now back to, I gave you a general perspective. Princess Noura University is the largest women's university in the world. We have a student body of over 30,000 students. We have 19 colleges and institutions. We are fairly young university of 10 years of age. We have 5 health colleges, 3 STEM colleges, 24% of PNU faculty are in STEM, and 22% of our students are also in STEM disciplines. What we gloat about is that 50% of our faculty are born 1980 and above. That makes them techno-savvy. They were really ready for the transformation to online education that happened with the pandemic. In terms of the research infrastructure, we are relying more now on external funding, just like anywhere in the world, peer review process, seeking funding from entities, research entities, and we've allocated special funds for research addressing COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19, interventions for COVID-19. And we've seen the impact of COVID-19 in the numbers of publications. We believe that with the e-learning and with faculty being at home at the beginning of the lockdown, we've seen an increase in the number of publications, reflecting the time allocated for faculty to actually finish their papers and submit them for publication. So that was a silver lining from COVID. The university has, just before COVID, we've launched our research identity. We are a health promoting university. Our research agenda revolves around lifestyle, health and wellness promotion. And we are building capacity and innovation in that field, primarily in community health mass approach in health promotion. And now to assess the impact of COVID on education, we are contributing through the National Observatory for Women, which is a research entity that actually monitors the impact of policymaking or interventions on women, among which the impact of COVID-19, developing indices that can measure and assess the impact and design appropriate interventions. And last but not least, when it comes to women promotion, leadership plays an important role. Princess Noura University plays a key role in developing the leadership among women through a center that looks at professional support, empowering physical space, national plan, national e-plan for talent discovery and acceleration, and of course, a recruitment platform. And we utilize this COVID era in building a leadership training through emotional intelligence. And we're designing new interventions and new approaches, studying the efficacy of these approaches, and hopefully we'll come up with a new recipe for women's success in leadership positions. The future. We've identified potential areas for women post-COVID era. The first of which is information technology. We have a lucrative opportunity in the entrepreneurial and SME sector, in the gig economy and job freelancing, and of course in the quality of life service sector. When it comes to women in information and technology ecosystem, we are looking into women tech kitchens and innovation in technology. For example, we are planning on the She Codes project, which will be a project hosting the annual graduation project for all female graduates among the country, aligning them with the proper investors, providing them with opportunity to showcase their innovation. And just 2 days ago, a group of female students from Princess Noura University won second prize in the NEOM challenge in AI technology in transportation. So we're quite very proud in not just the agenda, the political agenda in promoting women, but in the women response and the student response to such empowerment initiatives. In Women Tech Kitchens, we found that women in technology have, they've shown great ability during the COVID era in terms of doing, working from home on demand, remotely on IT projects. So we're designing this company that looks at, that builds women kitchens in the north of the country, south, east, and west, building on human resources, work environment, and of course, having the hub here at Princess Noura University. And last, the gig economy. We know that this is a generational preference. So we have no way of looking the other way. We actually have to design the right programs to meet the demand of this sector. And we have to be agile, we have to be responsive, we have to be innovative in providing the kind of education that provides or delivers the skills that are required for our youth to participate in this gig economy. And of course, the country is investing largely in the quality of life service sector. So we're also responding with the appropriate training and educational packages. And in fact, I just got back when everything is in lockdown worldwide. I just come back from a trip in the Red Sea 2 days ago, and it was just wonderful. And it was beautiful to see our young Saudi girls at the frontier of this business. Lastly, I'd like to really thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really wanted to showcase that we are truly living a golden era for Saudi women here in Saudi Arabia. And we've taken the COVID-19 as a challenge and opportunity to move forward, identify areas of strength, leverage on the huge investment that has been put in women education so far. This year, leaving no one behind and prioritizing women and youth empowerment. Thank you very much for your time.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for telling a very compelling story of the evolution of Saudi women, both in terms of the education as well as in the labor market sectors, and the efforts of Princess Noura University in empowering women, empowering girl students, and also improving learning and preparing them for the jobs of the future. So again, thank you very much. Now let me move to Professor Ayman Abdo and invite him to make his presentation. Professor Ayman Abdo is actually the Secretary General of the Saudi Health Commission. that is supporting the Kingdom's national efforts in managing the COVID-19 pandemic and in addressing the urgent need to invest in the education and training of local healthcare professionals during the health crisis to ensure the continuation of emergency services and in maintaining essential health services. Professor Abdo, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Again, let me thank everybody for this great opportunity. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm the last, but I hope the story I'm going to say is not the least, because I'm going to be very practical and not take more than maybe 7 minutes of your time. It's a great honor to share some ideas and experiences, and I'm sure we all have very useful information and experiences that could help us grow together and find our way in managing this current crisis we are all in, and God forbid any future crisis. I'm going to focus on our experience with supporting healthcare workers. As you all know, as the pandemic started, it was very obvious that the healthcare workforce became a central, integral part in fighting this virus. All of us grew up having great admiration and value for the military personnel, but most of us really did not like their doctor or their dentist because of bad memories with vaccinations or dental extracts. And so really, it became very clear that the amount of pressure and responsibility that was put upon healthcare workers was significant, and their well-being was an integral part in fighting this pandemic. I don't know if my slides are up, but I don't actually need the slides. So what happened is that we thought in the Saudi Commission of Health Specialties has two big roles. One, we license all healthcare workers in Saudi Arabia, but we also train in the postgraduate board and certification. So we are the ones like we are grateful or in gratitude or to you. And it was formed of 4 components. If you go to the next slide, please. First, we wanted to focus on psychological support of healthcare workers, and then professional support as they are going through their day-to-day lives fighting the virus, their scientific and educational needs, and then their social needs. If we can go on, please. So the first thing we did on psychological support was a program called DAIM. And DAIM is a very interesting platform, which is just an online platform where any practitioner in Saudi Arabia that has any signs of burnout or stress related to work during the pandemic was able to put his story in a very secretive, anonymous way. And he will be triaged by a psychologist who is available 24 hours, and then triaged for either just counseling or more intense psychological support or actual psychiatry visits. And that was available for trainees initially, and then for all healthcare workers. And then because of very high demands, it was actually expanded to Saudi doctors who are actually abroad, working in different countries of the world. This was very highly appreciated. It was not a very high cost, but it just gave the practitioners the sense that the community is behind them. If we can go on, please. One more slide. Then we did some very simple support mechanisms. There was, of course, the televised talk by the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz, who stressed very strongly in thanking and supporting healthcare workers. There was a phone call from the minister, and there was a phone call from myself, and I called 16,000 practitioners and just saying thank you. And you cannot imagine how much that had an impact on young physicians, nurses who are on the front lines. We also did not forget their families, so we've asked healthcare practitioners to identify who is your family member who's giving you the most support. And then that family member would get a message on his cell phone and a thank you letter with a very simple gift saying, thank you for supporting this healthcare practitioner. If you go one more, please. We also did an online leadership training for free for frontline healthcare workers, people who are head of the emergency rooms, who are triaging patients in the field, were under significant and tremendous stress. So not only they needed psychological support, they also needed some leadership and managerial support. So those are coaching, online coaching, which was free for everyone. If we go one more slide, please. Then just to summarize, the professional support, we said, during the pandemic, you don't need to worry about renewing your license. You don't need to worry about attending licensing exams. You don't need to worry about attending professional development activities. All that was taken care of, and that was a huge relief for healthcare workers. If you move on, please. I can't control the slides from here. Then we launched those webinars, which are general education webinars, which happens every other night or every third night, where we've talked about everything related to the pandemic. This was very, very heavily attended and populated, and it was a very nice way for healthcare workers from different specialties to come together and join ideas, support each other, at least get out of the mood of the day-to-day work and learn something new. We had international speakers from all over the world, and that was a very important experience. One more, please. The other thing, we've opened all the electronic resources for healthcare workers, and we've enabled all the partners in the e-learning arena to open up and do seminars and webinars as well. One more. Finally, the Saudi Commission of Health Specialties, through a very large national workforce that was ordered by the Royal Court, initiated these volunteer programs, which were multiple. One was so-called social volunteering. It's something for everybody. It's a 3-hour online training course to be able to support in the quarantine hotels, supporting people, identifying early signs of disease, educating people to where to go for testing, how to get, what do you do during quarantine. This was attended by 130,000 people who were certified, had an exam after these 3 hours courses. There was another one for hospitals, hospital volunteers, which was attended and graduated by 13,000 healthcare individuals, as well as social volunteering programs and some ICU programs. Most of those ICU programs had a didactic component, which was done online, and a simulation component, which was done in hospitals. I think I have one more slide. If you can move on, please. The other thing that was done is that we wanted to also give support to the Saudi doctors who are working abroad. We have thousands of doctors who are in scholarship in different countries in Europe, in Canada, in the United States, in the Far East, in Korea, and different places, who are actually treating patients and been on front lines in these countries. And we wanted to send a thank you letter from Saudi Arabia to them all over the world. So we did this very small, simple gratitude movie, which went viral, and people really appreciated that they felt inclusive in the national efforts in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I think that is it. If you can just go one more slide. So I think this just illustrates that you could buy testing machines, you can open hospitals, you can do whatever you want to fight the pandemic, but the real people who are in the front lines, we've had very fascinating stories of young physicians and nurses renting apartments beside the hospital so that they can avoid meeting their parents. Having a letter, a thank you, support, a webinar was of great extensive effort. This is just the one glimpse of that part. Of course, the story of COVID in Saudi Arabia, I think, hopefully is a successful story. And it is an honor to share just glimpses of this story with you. I thank you all for listening, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the G20 presidency, and congratulations for the UN. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Ammar Abdo, on providing sort of an overview of the efforts that the Commission has done in support of the healthcare workers, whether professional, psychological, or scientific. Actually, this presentation is probably the closest to my heart, being a medical doctor myself. And I had actually many of my friends and colleagues who have been infected with COVID-19, and unfortunately, some of them have paid the ultimate price and sacrifice, trying to help patients combat the disease. So thank you very much for giving a glimpse of hope and support to the health community. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes our presentations. And I don't know if we have time. I don't think we have time for Q&A. So, but okay, just one question that comes to my mind that I would like to pose to Her Excellency, Professor Ines, about the excellent work that you are doing in improving learning and preparing your students for the future. But as you've noted, only female labor participation is only 23%, while female, I have to admit, outperform boys in primary and in higher education. So when we talk about human capital in a country that is underutilized, here you have already human capital that is ready to be utilized. So my question to you, what are you doing to link your graduates to the labor market and place them in jobs where they can show these talents and these skills? Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Samah. What an important question, and quite relevant to all educators around the world, I think. The participation in labor markets has multidimensional facets. It does not only rely on education. Yes, we as educators have huge responsibility, but it starts with legislative reforms. Legislative reforms that ensures that we will have the best talents going into the right sectors. And here in Saudi Arabia, we have the political willpower to drive this agenda forward. That's one. Number two, we have a holistic approach of synergistic work among different ministries to work together in panels to write the right policy to drive, for example, I'll give you an example. In terms of women participation in technology, we have a huge number of women, great talent going into technology schools. But then the women participation in technology in Saudi Arabia, as communicated by the Ministry of Communication, is only 17%. So the Ministry of Communication is putting forward packages to incentivize women to enroll in IT jobs. For example, working from home, part-time jobs, flex time, maternal leave, all these incentives that will be put forward to attract the right talent. That's one. From our perspective, we have to really examine the right skills that are required for these jobs. So assertiveness, compassion, empathy, leadership qualities, these are all coming into mind now when we talk about education. It's no longer a degree certification, it's really about skills empowerment. So I'm telling you now, we're in Saudi Arabia, the holistic approach and the synergy we have with the private sector and the government and the legislative reform that's taking place, and it's a national strategy. We have an objective that is well communicated by the government that we have to increase the enrollment of women in the labor market. So we have the right ingredients for success to move forward with this agenda. Thank you, Dr. Sameh.
Thank you very much for an elaborate response, and probably it requires even more discussion because this is an important topic, and I'm an advocate of women empowerment and women participation in the labor market. I hate to see many of our female colleagues who are very well talented and really have the skills for the jobs of the future, and their skills are not fully utilized. I think that we come to the end of my session, and I'll hand it over to the Master of Ceremony. And again, thank you all for a very rich discussion and presentation. So I'll just over to you.
Thank you very much. I would also like to thank the panelists, moderator, and participants for taking part in the discussions of the second thematic session. This now marks the closing of the thematic sessions and panel discussions. Proceeding to the last item on today's agenda, I would like to invite Dr. Adam Boulokos, Resident Representative, UNDP, to deliver the closing remarks of the event. Please.
Very good. Thank you, Elias. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you all to the colleagues who've put this together, and for all of those out there who've listened to this session today. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. And that's a phrase that I learned in my work in East Africa. I think it covers all those who are participating in this kind of event. And it's always a bit frustrating when it's virtual. You never can see all those people. But I know you're out there, and I know that you've been engaged, and I want to thank you for that. Today, of course, marks the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. I've spent the last 25 years of my life in the United Nations, so a third of that time. And it seems that challenge after challenge is coming upon us. And earlier this year, the Secretary General himself launched the UN-75 initiative that we learned earlier, a kind of global conversation on all the challenges that we face. And it was an invitation for people everywhere to share their ideas on how to build a better, more sustainable world. Then COVID-19 hit, and in some ways, everything kind of ground to a halt. But of course, that's not really what happened. What we learned today is that the world did not stop. We've experienced the loss of human lives, the disruption of the global economy, food insecurity, joblessness, and a step backward, in fact, in meeting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The G20 and its presidency this year, held by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, from where I speak today, has committed itself to advance the 2030 Agenda by broadening its traditional work on economic growth and macro financial issues to include social, development, and environmental challenges. To date, and with the leadership of the Saudi G20 presidency, the G20's positive contributions to the SDGs are significant and noticeable in cross-cutting areas such as global health, women's empowerment and participation, anti-corruption, infrastructure, climate, financial inclusion, trade and investment, agriculture, and other areas. Because of the sheer density of this agenda, right, I'm certain today's discussion made clear that in order for no one to be left behind, the partnership between the UN system and the G20 is more relevant than ever before. COVID-19, as is the most pressing and immediate challenge, requires more and not less coordination and collective action among countries and stakeholders. Today's discussions are a strong reminder of how our world is interconnected. The pandemic has encouraged us to adopt new ways of thinking and employed innovations that will accelerate the path toward achieving the SDGs. In the days leading up to the G20 Leaders Summit, which is scheduled to take place next month, the United Nations in Saudi Arabia and far beyond will continue to discuss the global health emergency response, the global economic recovery, and the global sustainable development agenda. In closing, I ask you to join the UN-75 online community to continue the open dialogue on the future we want. This is a time for us to do things differently and transform together toward a more inclusive, fair, and sustainable future. I want to thank you all for being part of this today, and I do hope that we can welcome you in our UN house face-to-face next year, inshallah. It has to get better. We're all working together toward that. And one of the things that we learn in the United Nations is at our core, we need to be optimists, and we need to be pragmatists at the same time. So much is happening on the health front, so much is happening on the social welfare front, job creation front, that we'll turn this corner, and we'll turn it together, as we always do in the United Nations, with the support and engagement of everyone out there who's listening. So I thank you very much for your time. With that, I'll close the session. Thank you.
I would like to thank Dr. Adam Bouloukos for his closing remarks. As this marks the end of today's conference and live stream, allow me to once again thank all the speakers, panelists, moderators, and the audience, of course, for their valuable interventions and participation. Let me conclude with the invitation to the audience to join the UN75 conversation in order to help us build a better future by going to un75.online. I'll repeat, un75.online, and answering the survey we have there. We look forward to hearing your voice. With this, I announce the official closing of the conference. Thank you very much.